And my name is Dan Yeaw. Really excited to give a talk about building GUI apps with Python and GTK. This should be fun. We're going to build a text editor. In my main job, I work for Ford as a systems engineer doing functional safety. And I have fun doing Python mostly in my free time. So really excited to be showing everyone how we can build a text editor or other apps for using on our computers. So maybe let's get started first. Like, what is a GUI app? So a graphical user interface, or a GUI, allows you to interact through your graphical display. And they're built using what's called a GUI toolkit. So this kind of gives you all these things called widgets that let you build up an app. So, I'm using Zoom right now, or my web browser. Those are all GUI applications that let us do cool things with our computers. And I mean, versus other things, there's like command line apps, and we can build those using Python. Probably very easy to build simple things with Python to, print out hello world or something on the command line. In general, though, it kind of has a steep learning curve for others to pick up your app and make use of it. Web-based apps are also really good for certain types of things. And I kind of think of web-based apps more for consumption. What I mean by that is hey, if you need to receive information or interact with stuff, or I don't know, send email or something, web-based apps are great for that. But if you actually want to create something, I think having that native integration on your desktop is really good. And that's where a GUI app comes in. And so you can then interact on your own device and be able to save things locally on your computer. And I think it's really good for kind of those creating type things, like audio editing or creating a PowerPoint or whatever it is. So in Python, there's actually a lot of app options for creating GUI apps. The first one is built into the standard library. So that means it comes with Python. It's called tkinter. Unfortunately, it looks a little, I would say, outdated, but it's a great way to get started. You don't need to download any extra toolkits or anything because it's included with Python, which is fun. Then there's PyQt and PySide, and it wraps this C++ library called Qt. And so the widgets it provides are based on this Qt framework for building GUIs. WX Python also wraps C++ libraries based on WX widgets. And you can kind of see this pattern that often there's these GUI toolkits written in another language, and then we wrap them using Python to make use of them. There's a cool library called PySimpleGUI, which wraps actually all three of the ones above, tkinter, PyQt, and WX Python, to help kind of simplify GUI creation. There's also Kivy. It's more aimed at building games, so you can make the interface look like however you want. It doesn't have, file menus and kind of what you would expect from a desktop app. But if you wanted to build a game, it's a great way to build kind of a user interface for the game itself. And then there's Toga. This is kind of like an early development by the Beware project, but it allows you to build native apps across platforms. So in Windows, it'll look like a native app, or it really is a native app, and same thing in Mac OS and Linux. So that's pretty cool. And then we're going to be using PyGObject, or GTK. So this is the wraps the C-based GTK library. GTK is used a lot in kind of the Linux world, and we'll see that in a minute for projects like Gnome or Gnome, however you want to pronounce it, which is the desktop environment in Linux. But you can also run GTK apps in Windows and Mac OS and other operating systems. So GTK, it was originally created as the GIMP toolkit. And some of you are probably familiar with, there's a maybe Photoshop clone, or a art tool called GIMP that you can download, which is open source. And it was actually originally created as the toolkit to create that back in the day. And so it's very popular on Linux for app development. And I mentioned this Gnome or Gnome desktop environment. It is a full-featured GUI toolkit, so you can build, everything from map views and games and mail clients and web browsers, pretty much anything. It's a little harder to set up in Windows, and unfortunately doesn't have any mobile platform support, except if you were, I guess, running Linux on your phone, which is much less common, of course. And the latest release is 4.10. And so we'll be using that latest release today when we build our app. I saw in chat, there was a question from Moose who's asking if our GUI environment will be Linux or Windows. So I have Linux going right now. So what I'm gonna show you is in Linux, but you could definitely build this Hello World app that I'm showing in Windows. And I'll talk about how it takes a little bit more work. You have to actually compile GTK for Windows, but I'll talk in a second how you would do that. So, and in my free time, I work on this open source modeling tool called Gaphor, and it is written in GTK and it's cross-platform. So it supports macOS and Linux and Windows. So it's definitely possible to create like cross-platform apps using GTK as well. So this is like a simple hello world example. So we import GI, which stands for G-object introspection, and it's what GTK uses to import that wrapper I said around GTK. And it has you tell it which version of GTK you want to use. And we're using the latest 4.10. So you put GTK 4.0. As opposed to like if you're using an older version, you might put like 3.0 or something like that. And then you always say from gi.repository import GTK. So this is like the actual library. And then there's a main function of the app called onActivate. And maybe I'll come back to that in a second. So we create a gtk.application and we gave it like an ID for the application. And then we tell that this application that we want to connect to activate. And then we connect it to the onActivate function that we have here. So what this is for a GUI app, you wouldn't want to like be, when you're writing your code, you wouldn't want to be checking all the time, like, hey, did the user press on this? And did they press on that? And, you know, did they move their mouse here? Instead, GTK uses an event-based system. So when an event happens in the app, then you connect those events to function calls. And in this case, this function call is for the app to activate itself. And then you say, hey, when the app activates, that's what it's doing, then run this function. And it would be the same thing like, hey, you would connect an event or a signal for when someone clicks on a menu or someone closes the app. You would tell it what you want to happen. So that's kind of what this event-based system is for and why we connect the app to this function. So you create this application window and you pass in the app that we had here that we connected to. And then you create a button with a label called Hello World. So that's what's shown right here. And then when you connect the clicked event, so when someone clicks on the button, we want to close the window. So what this would do is like you click on Hello World and the window closes. And then we set the child of the window itself, this button, and that tells the app that you want the button to appear inside the application. And then you present the app, or present the window, which opens the window for the user. So if we ran this now, you'd have a window pop up with the Hello World button and you click on it and then the app would close. So not the most exciting application, but it's kind of the simple Hello World example. So let's talk about how we install this in Windows. Going back to Moose's question, I know this is kind of a lot of steps, and I said, hey, this is maybe a little more complex in Windows than other environments. I actually help maintain this library called GBS build, and it allows you to compile GTK for Windows, which is, yeah, that's cool. Pretty much you clone this repository using Git, so download the source code, and then you create a virtual environment and activate it. So now you have this place where you can run your code. And then you want to pip install the library, this GVS build, and then you run this command GVS build, and you want to enable GI introspection because we want to be able to use Python with it. And we'll also generate some PyWheels for installing it. And then these are the libraries we need. So there's GObject introspection, GTK, PyCairo, and some icons. And then there's some commands to add this bin for GTK to your path. And then once you have that all built, you're going to have to go get coffee for a while because it's going to take a little while, but then you can, and this is some PowerShell to install the two wheels you built in a virtual environment. So I know that's kind of a lot, but yeah, that's how you'd install GTK in Windows. So Moose is asking if you don't have any Python installed, these commands will be all I need. I have Linux. So on the next slide, I'll go through how to do this with Linux, which will be far easier. You're going for GVS build to work, you will need Python to run. So yeah, you're running Python. So you'd want to go to python.org and download Python for Windows as well. And I'll get to Linux in just a minute, but for Mac OS, we would use Homebrew, which is a package manager for Mac OS to install GTK. There's a lot fewer commands than in Windows. So you'd brew install PyGObject 3 and GTK4. And then once again, create a virtual environment. And then you could pip install PyGObject into your virtual environment. So those are the main dependencies are these two that are brew installable with Homebrew. And finally in Linux, so this is commands for like Debian or Ubuntu, but you would apt-get or apt-install these few libraries. So there's libgi repository 1.0.dev, GCC, libcairo, package config, Python 3dev, and then this GTK4 GObject introspection 1.2 here. Same kind of, those are the dependencies you need in Linux, and then the same type of thing. You'd want to activate a virtual environment and pip install PyGObject. Okay, so now we've installed GTK. So what we're going to do today, there's a app in Linux called Builder, and this is a little bit different, and it's actually a little bit different than what I normally use, where I'm like normally programming in PyCharm or VS Code or something for Python. We're going to actually use this Gnome's IDE, and it does a really good job in the desktop environment to kind of generate an app for you that's already set up. And then we'll use that generated app to edit it and create a text editor. It also, so you can install Builder using FlatHub if you're on Linux. Once again, like in Mac OS or Windows, we need to build Builder from source, which should be a little bit more challenging, but it's possible. You can use Mason to build it. So that's what Builder is, and we'll see that in a second. Today, we're going to create a text editor. So we want to be able to edit some text. Maybe we could open, a Python file or something like that. We're going to keep things pretty maybe simple for the text editor. So kind of the goals today is being able to edit some text, open files, save top files, but we'll have like a real text editor that we could really use written in Python. So Mike's asking, does GTK integrate with other Python libraries like NumPy and Pandas? So you can use kind of the data science tools, especially things like matplotlib and stuff like that, to be able to take a graph and put it in a GTK window. You can use any Python library in a GTK app, so there's no reason you couldn't use NumPy and Pandas. You would just have to design maybe the app around how would you input data to that library in the back end, and then how would you show it, I guess. But it's definitely possible to yeah, you could create a table in a GTK app, and that becomes a pandas data frame, and then you click a button and it becomes like a graph or something like that. That's definitely, yeah, totally doable.
Cool. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah. So let's build our text editor. Does that sound good? Is there any other questions before we change gears here? Okay, so we have this. Oh, I saw one more question. Moose, does GTK build other things as well? Maybe not quite sure on the question, Moose. Maybe you could ask it another way. I guess these are like some other Gnome or Gnome projects you can see that you can actually contribute to. So it's like full featured set of projects, anything from maps and clocks and calendars and yeah, file managers, anything you can like imagine. All that stuff is built using GTK, and not all of these are built using Python themselves. So you could, but you can see some of them are, like, for example, this music player is written in Python as well. But the overall process is kind of the same. It's just we're going to be building up around the app our like logic using Python, because yeah, we're Michigan Python. That'll be fun. Okay, thanks, Moose, on that. So what we're going to do is create a new project. And we're going to give our project a name. So maybe we could call it like GTK text editor, whatever we like. Your application ID is a reverse domain identifier. So we could use like org Michigan Python, because we own michiganpython.org, and then maybe we could call it like text editor or something. And this is like a common format in Linux to like give an identifier for an app. Yeah, kind of like a full namespace identifier for the app. So it's just like an application ID. The location I have here is set to like my projects folder, but you could pick somewhere else if you want. We're going to pick on our language dropdown. We want to use Python. I'm going to just select MIT for the license, and we can enable version control. That's good. So Git will be set up if we want to commit our changes to Git, or yeah, move it to GitHub or something. And we're going to use this Gnome application template and click on Create Project. And you can see that it is very fast. So this is the interface for Builder. On the left is a like file menu. In the center here is where like the text files will be, and we'll kind of walk through like what it generated for us. So it created all these files in a folder, and based on the name of our app, which is that GTK text editor. So the first thing it created was a README. So if we were putting this on GitHub or something, this is the README that tells a little bit about the app. I'm going to put that GTK text editor in the title, and we could add some more description. Some other files it has, there's this application ID.json. And this JSON file is for Flatpak, which is a format for installing apps in Linux. So it created this like Flatpak file already, so that if we wanted to share this app with others, it would already like be packaged up for other people. There's a license file called copying for that MIT license. And then it also uses Mason, and Mason is a build tool. It's very common, especially like in languages that need to be compiled, like C or C++. But it also works for Python. So what this is doing is creating a project with Mason called GTK text editor with a version. And then it's making use of some features that Mason has called internationalization and Gnome. And then it's saying, hey, there's these 3 subdirectories you need to know about: the data, PO, and source. And then after you install the app, it's going to do 3 things: the compile schemas, it's going to update the icon cache, and the desktop database. And we can talk a little bit more about what those things are, but this is kind of a Mason build file. Okay, so the other directories in here, we have a PO folder. This is for translations. And so we would actually put in this pot files, it's saying these are all the files in our project that need to be translated. So if we wanted to also have our app available in Spanish or French or some other language, we could put the translations in here as well. And then this mason.build file in the PO folder is also saying, hey, use, I guess, extract the translation strings when we're building the project. So that's for translation of the project. There's a data folder that has icons. And once again, there's kind of this mason.build at each level, but there's like, it comes with icon, like a sample icon built in. You could add your own icons. And then there's 3 other main files. One is a desktop file. So that's what allows you to have like a launcher for your app on a desktop in Linux. There's a app data file that would be for a software store. And we can see what these look like. So the desktop entry, yeah, is how when you double click or have the ability to double click on an icon and be able to open it and add it to your menu, right? So you can add an icon and the name of it, and it tells it to execute the application. There's this app data format, which is for a software store for actually installing the app. And this tells it the information about the app, and you can add screenshots and all kinds of stuff like that. And G schema is used for settings. So there's a bunch of like settings, I guess, a bunch of files that are kind of like built in for like setting up the app and integrating it in a desktop environment. We don't have to worry about too much about that. I think Builder just crashed on me. Sorry about that, but we'll reopen our text editor. We'll spend most of our time in this source folder. So this has all the source code that we need. And you can see there's a few different files in here. And some of them, probably some of you are familiar with. We have .py files. So these are the Python files. And then we have, once again, a mason.build file for Mason. And it has information on how to kind of like build the project. Maybe we won't go too much into that, but things like how to import Python, remember we talked about the settings, that G resource file, where the configuration file is, and the other configuration data. And also like, it's also telling it where the source files are. So this is for building the project. And then the main parts of the program, there's a dunder init file that's blank that just tells Python that this is a module. There's a main.py. And I'll just maybe remove the license out of this file so it's a little bit easier to see. But we can see that there's one main Python file, and it's actually very similar to that Hello World application. And we'll kind of go through each part of it in a moment here. There's a window.py, and we'll remove license again so it's a little easier to see. And it's just loading this GTK template from this window.ui file. So what we're using this .ui file for is ability to lay out what your application looks like. It's actually in an XML format, so you don't have to write Python code to lay out what your like user interface looks like. So where are the menus, and what are the kind of widgets or parts of the program you want to add and stuff like that. And so this is just taking that template and saying, hey, our main GTK text editor window is this application window. So if we hit run up here at the top, it's actually running Mason and starting the application. And you can see we've created a window. And it's a simple hello world. It's got a little menu that has 3 things. Preferences, and all preferences does is print out app.preferences action activated, so it doesn't do much. There's keyboard shortcuts, but it has 2 shortcuts for showing the shortcuts and for quitting. So not a lot, but you can see it has a couple things, and also like an about menu. And this is that icon in the data folder we talked about. That's the default icon, but you could add your own. And there's also credits. So it says coded by me, and also legal, there's a copyright, right? So that's like the about window. So this is like the hello world that it builds kind of out of the box for us. So that's cool. Now we want to, instead of writing hello world here, we want to like make it into a text editor. So that's our plan today. So maybe let me just talk through the app a little bit, and then we will kind of get started on making some changes. So there's at the top, first of all, we want to import GTK. There's also this ADW, which stands for AdWata, which is a lib AdWata, and it provides some nice additional look and style to GTK apps, especially has been used to like commonize a lot of the themes and stuff. This main class called GTK text editor application. It's got a dunder init method for starting, I guess, the main initialization for the class. And it's creating this application and creating these three main actions, right? So there's a quit, which calls self.quit, and it has this action it's creating has a primary key and Q. So something like control Q would allow it to quit. We create an action called about, which calls self on about action, and we add one for preferences, which calls self on preferences action. So once again, this is very similar to the menu we just saw, where you have three options for quit, about, and preferences. And so we're setting up these actions for that. This do activates called when the application is activated. And once again, this is all like generated by the template to start with, just to start us off, which is awesome. And then we can edit this in a second. So it's checking if it's the application. And if it's not the application, it's creating this editor window and then presenting it to opening it. When you call about, it's creating this AdWata about window, and then it's passing in its transit for the main active window. It's giving it a name and an icon and all the information, and then presenting it. And that was just what we saw, right? When you click on legal, it shows copyright and it shows who the developers are. So this is from that about window. When you click on preferences, it was printing app.preferences action activated. So it's not doing anything, it just prints that. This is what the create action that's called appear actually does, right? So now this is the function there. So it uses something called GIO, which is part of this glib library, and all that is like input, output, and networking, and kind of like these low-level things. So we want to create an action in a menu. So we call GIO simple action new and give it a name. So when we go back up here, when we put in quit or on about action, it's calling about and then passing in the function, right? And so it's connecting activate. So we're adding these event handlers and the callback, right? So we pass in the example up here was about, and you give it the callback function on about action, and then it's connecting that all up, right? And then if there's a shortcut, it sets self.set excels for action, and then it sets the name of the thing, like quit, so app.quit, and then gives it the shortcut. So this is what gives you something like primary Q. This was the shortcut that was passed in on this quit action, and then that gets passed in as the shortcut here, right? So into the function create action. The last one's for shortcuts, and it's optional. And then finally, we run the main function. So you call GTK text editor application, that gets the app, and then you return the app to run it. So that's kind of like the main application. And now we can start editing it and make a text editor. So this XML that we kind of talked about here, this was for editing the layout of the app, remember? And so like, bear with me for just a second, because we're going to be editing a little bit of XML, which isn't like the most exciting thing. It is nice to have like this XML format because it can separate this .ui file. It separates the layout of the app from like the app logic, which is nice. And it's also possible to then, I don't know, code up other apps that can let you like visually add things to an app as well. And there is one for GTK called Cambalache, but it's probably still kind of early in development. I'll pause for another second. Besides our Zoom bombing we got, does anyone have any other questions? So I see Moose, you asked, is XML like HTML? Yeah, it's very similar. It's a markup language. Yeah, so HTML is hypertext markup language, often for websites, and XML is this extensible markup language, maybe for broader use of things than just like a website. So it allows us to configure the app using, it's kind of semi-readable by humans or semi-editable, right? Maybe not like great to look at as Python, but still pretty easy to edit and look at. So hopefully that answers your question. Thanks for that one. Also, like I'll mention there, we are kind of like running through the tutorial because that's what Builder kind of sets up for us. So if anyone gets stuck later on this, there's a full tutorial to do as well. So let's create our text editor. So we want to create kind of this view for the app to be able to add content to it. And so the first thing we can do, if you remember, or we can always run our app to look at it. So what would be nice is it would be nice to give this app a title besides GTK-text editor, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So if we go to the top here, we have at the top this template. Remember, we are pulling in the template to our app, which loads this UI file. And it's got like a default width and a height. That's how big the app is. But we can also give it another property, which is the title. So we're going to give it property name and give it title. And then we can call this the Michigan Python text editor. And that's the property we're going to add. And then immediately we can check it out and see what our changes were made. And you can see that now the title is Michigan Python text editor. So it's pretty quick to like make a change to the UI and then run the app and see what the change came out like, right? So that's like a very basic change, but we'll make some other updates. What we want in the center section right now, it says hello world. We want a window in there and we want a scrolled window. So if you load a large file, you want to be able to scroll down on the file. And so we use a scroll window in order to do that. So right now we have this GTK label and we don't need that in there. So if we remove this GTK label from here, we can then, I guess, add something else instead there. And what we want to add is a GTK label, right? And just bear with us while we write a little bit of XML. So we want to create this GTK labels. So we're gonna put GTK scrolled window in here. And then we want to give it some properties. So we're going to write property and then give it that property name. And there's two things we want to do. We want to do a horizontal and vertical expand so that the scrolled window takes up all the space inside the window. And so we'll do hexpand and mark that true. And we'll copy that and do the same thing for a vertical expand. And then we can create another property and give some margins around it so that the scrolled window has some room around the outside. This is just so it looks a little nice, right? So we can give it margin top and give it 6. And we can do the same thing for all the sides. So instead of top, we can also do bottom. So instead of left and right, it calls it start and end. And that's kind of based on, depending on your orientation, whether it's like vertical or horizontal, the start would be, something on the left-hand side and the end would be on the right-hand side. And so that's kind of the nomenclature it uses for that. Okay, so we added this scrollable container. And then let's add some, we want to add like a text view to it, right? To actually add the a text area, right? So we're still in this area and we want to add one more property and we'll name it a child. So that means that this text area is going to be a child of the parent GTK scrolled window, because we want the text area to be inside of it. And then in that child, we'll want to create a GTK text view. So that's like the widget that it uses to actually add text. So we want to be able to write on the screen and we use a GTK text view to do that. So we're going to create another object and it has a class called GTK text view. And we also want to give it an ID because we'll want to say in our Python what the name of this thing is. So we'll call it the main text view. I have 2 closures. Okay, so we've created this GTK text view and it's got an ID. And once again, the ID is so we can say in our Python that we want to use this main text view because we'll want to do things with it in Python, right? And then we can also add properties to this. So our property name, I guess we're making kind of like a coding app. So let's monospace helps with the keep the type spaced like we'd expect in a text editor. So we'll add a property called monospace and make it equal to true. Okay, so we got through some XML writing a little bit, right? So we added this GTK scrolled window. It's got a text view in it. So now we can go back to our window.py file and we can now tell it the program that we want to load this, right? So before it was loading a label from our UI file, but we removed the label. So now we want to say the main text view. Remember, that was the ID in the UI file called main text view. So we're going to say main text view equals gtk.template.child. So it's pulling that name thing out of this window.ui for us to use in Python. And I saw Moose, she said, hey, do we already have open and save? We do not yet. So that would be like the next step. Once we're able to edit text, we could add like a open file menu for you to actually open a file or something like that, right? And that would actually be kind of next up. So that's a good lead in. So let's try running this. We'll see if we are successful. So it says Michigan Python text editor. And look at that. I can say, hi, everyone, right? We can type text. Whatever we want to type. You can also see there's a margin around it a little bit. I'm not sure if that's that easy to see, but there's that 6 pixel margin around the outside, which looks kind of nice. And if we said we made a scroll window, see now here that the window can scroll up and down like that, right? Which is what we wanted. All right, success. So we actually have a text editor. It doesn't do much yet, but we're editing text. So next up, we do want to be able to open files because I don't know. Yeah, what's the point of having a text editor if you can't open and probably eventually save a file, right? So we want to add, in order to do that, we need an open button. And so we're going to head back into the UI definition to add an open button. And if we load this one more time, we're going to want the open button in this header bar. So like over here, we'll create an open button. So you can click open in the header bar and open your file there. And that header bar is called the GTK header bar. It has the title. Also you can add buttons to it. And that's what this GTK menu button, I'll open it one more time. This is the header bar. There's a title part of it. And then this is that menu button, is this GTK menu button right here, right? And it's a child of the main header bar. So we want to add another button on our header bar so that we can open files. You also notice it says child type GTK menu button end. That puts the GTK menu button on the right-hand side. We probably want our open button on the left-hand side. So we'll do the opposite, and instead of child type end, we'll do child type start. And then we want to create, once again, a object class underneath it. And we want a GTK button. That's the widget we want to use so that we can click on a button and it does something, and we want to give it an ID again. And we can call it open button. Oh. I need to put this in quotes because it's a string. Okay, so we created an open button and gave it a name. And then we want to give it a label. So we create a property on the object again. And the property name equals label. So we want to give it a label and we'll call it open. And then we can also create another property. So the label adds the open on top of the button, right? So people know what the button does, and we'll give it an action name. And then this is win.open. So the action name is what we're going to map in when someone pushes on the button, that then it does something for us. In this case, we want to bring up this file chooser so you can select a file to use. Okay, so we've added our button with label and an action. We can try running it, see what happens. Now look at that. Oops, so we have a Michigan Python window still here, and we got an open button that's grayed out that doesn't do anything, right? But it's there. So we've added a button. Now we need to kind of hook up the button and make it do something. So we want to go back to our window.py, and just like we had for the main text view, I'll copy that, except we want to call this the open button now. So we're pulling that open button ID from the template. And then next on up, we want to add that open action to our main app. So we go into our main.py. And actually, it's actually not here first. In here, we need to add our action. And there's one other thing we need to do. So we need to also import GIO. And maybe let's clean this up a little bit. So we have GIO, GTK, we can put that all on one line. Okay, so GIO, remember this is this IO library that we're going to use, and we're going to need to use that to map the action to open something. And then on our dunder init method here, we're going to create an open action, which is equal to gio.simple action. And we're going to name it open. Oh, there we go. And then we want to connect this action here to do something, right, when an event happens. So we're going to do open action dot connect, because we want to connect it to an event that happens. And we'll connect it to activate. And we want to call self open file dialog. And then self dot add action open action. So remember, we were looking at the main.py, and there was some created actions here for the menu in this GTK editor application. We are doing the same thing, creating this open action, connecting it to activate, and then we want to open this file dialog, and then we're adding this action into this into the app itself, right? So, and then next we want to actually create the method for this. So we could define the open file dialog. So we open file dialog is the method's name, and it gets self because it's a method, and then the action in, and then we don't need to mess with the last thing called in, so we'll just put an underscore for that. And right now we've created this open file dialog right now, and if we let's try to like run this one more time and see if anything's changed yet. Okay, so our button is clickable now. We're making steady progress. So our button's clickable, but it doesn't do anything yet. So the question in chat from Moose was, what does activate do? So it just means, hey, when we have this action that's taking place with open, right, that we said in our window.ui, we gave it this action name, win.open. And now we're kind of plumbing that up so that it does something for us. So when it activates, which means the button is pressed, then it launches this method call. And then we want this method call to like do something for us, right? And so this is our text editor. And right now, so it's calling this method, but the method's not doing anything, and we'll fix that next. So next, yeah, thanks for the question, Moose, on that. So next we want to go back to well, before we work on this, we'll go back to our main.py, and we want to go to our application here. So we have our GTK editor application window, and we created the actions for about and preferences. Well, we also want to set our keyboard shortcut for opening as well. So let's hook that up. So we could do self, and the keyboard shortcuts are hooked up with this Excel's for action. So that stands for like a keyboard accelerator. And we'll do win.open was the action name, right? And so our Excels we want for this is like Control O for this one. And then we can, we are closing it. Okay, so so that is hooking up our win.open to Control O as well. So if we launch that now, we got our open button, and Control O clicks the button as well. I don't know if you're able to see that, but it does click on it as well. So, okay, so now we want to be able to select a file to open with a computer as well. So we're slowly building on here. So next on, we can go to create this open file dialog. So back in our window.py, we created this method, and now we want it to actually do something. So we're going to create We'll call it self.native because we're going to use this native file dialog that's built into the operating system. So in Linux, we'll open the file dialog for Linux, or in Windows, we'll open one for Windows. And that's called the file chooser native. And so now we need to pass in some information for it. So we want to give it a title. So that's what pops up, and we want to say it open file. We want to give it transient for and pass in self. So this is the class for the application window. And that just means this file chooser dialog is like kind of a transient pop-up for our main application window. And then we want an action, which is GTK file chooser action dot open. So that tells it what action to perform. And then it has an accept and cancel button, and we can give those labels. And so the accept label, once you click on a file, we'll give it open. And the cancel label, how about cancel? That's probably pretty easy. What this underscore here means is that the O will be the keyboard shortcut, or the C will be the keyboard shortcut there. So if you wanted to use a different character as a keyboard shortcut, you could do that instead, right? Okay, so we've created our file chooser native, and you could do self native and connect. And we want to connect is the response signal. So, hey, you've either hit accept or cancel, and then the response signal is what is sent. So we want to connect to the response signal for this and do self.on open response. So the user is either going to open the file or cancel, and then once you click open or cancel, this event gets sent to do something. And so we're going to have to tell it what to do on open response, right? So that's a new function that we need to call. And then we want to call self.native show. So that will show the actual window. Okay, so we now need to code up this on open response as well to do something. Once again, this handles the response, that someone clicked on one of the two buttons. So should we create another method real quick? So define on open response, and we pass in self, the dialog, and the response. Okay, so the response is going to get passed in through connecting it to this signal. All the events pass in the data per the event, right? So the response passes in the dialog and the response. And if we want to say if response equals, and then there's a GTK response type accept. So if someone hit accept, then we want to do something, and we want to open the file. And we want to ask the dialog what the file is. So we do get file. And if it's not that, we don't need to do anything, right? Because we just need to cancel. And so at the end of this method, we can say self.native equals none. So we're like destroying our file dialog chooser and saying, okay, this can go away now because we're done with it. We got our response. And we'll put a placeholder for the second thing, which is we need to actually open the file. So there's a self and file, and we'll put a placeholder for that right now. So this is for actually opening the file itself, which is what we'll want to do, once that works. So should we see what happens? we have open button, we have a dialog, right? So we can, maybe let's go to our project. Create a GTK text editor. We could open a Python file or something. Is it going to open? Nope, it's not going to open, right? But because we haven't said what to do when to open a file. So that'll be the next step. But the file chooser, is it working? Once again, there's an open button. We named that. There's a cancel button. We named that as well. And this is kind of that native file chooser built into the OS. You could even do things like add a filter if you want to of the file type or something like that, if you want to be even more fancy. I'll pause for 1 second. Is there any questions about that? And it's also giving me an error on, I have a typo there. It says a name error response is not defined. So we needed to fix that typo. Any other questions, anyone? All right, let's so Moose is asking, what does self underscore native dot connect do on this line, right? So this is connecting the signal for this file chooser native is what self dot underscore native is. And it has a signal called response. So it knows when you either click accept or cancel, or in this case, we called it open and cancel, that an event gets sent, and that callback for that event loads this self on open response. So we don't have to have logic that says, did the users hit open? Did they hit open now? Did they hit open now? So it's always sending that callback just when the user hits open. And so then that on open response will actually take care of checking, well, was it an accept response or did they click something else, and tell it to actually open the file. So that's kind of using that callback event system that GTK has. So we will open our, thanks for the question, Moose. So we'll open our file now, contents. And once again, the file got passed in, right? And actually, I don't think we need the contents there because that'll be for the next step. So we'll just take the file and we want to load the contents. And we're going to load it asynchronously, which means for a GUI application, if you had a big file, you wouldn't want to go off and run the file opening and block the application because it would look like the application freezes. So the asynchronous means we ask for the file to load, and then when it's done, then it says, oh, I'm done loading, and then informs the application. And while it's loading, the application is still responsive. So that's what the async is for, asynchronous. And then we'll do self.open file complete. So this is saying, hey, when it's done loading, call this method. So that's the load contents async does that for us, which is great. And then we need yet another method called define open file complete. It's a method, so we put self as the first thing. It accepts the file and the results. So once it's done opening this file asynchronously, then we get the contents of it. The first thing that contents returns is the results, whether it's successful. So we'll load contents, finish, result. So we got the file and we're calling this load contents finish result. So we want to know what the result of loading the file is. And we're passing in the result it sent us. And then we can check if the contents were good or not. So if contents, if contents were, the result, once again, is true or false, whether it's successful or not. So the first part of this call, the 0 index is the result. So if it's not successful, if it was, then we would want to say like, we were unable to open the file. So we could do path equals file dot peak path. So we could figure out where the file is that we were trying to get, and that's what this peak path does. And then we could print an error message like unable to open path, because we figured out what the path was, right? And then contents, and then these are those contents, right, that we want. 1 and end our string here. Okay, so if it's not successful, we print out what the path of the file is, and then tell it what the contents were that we're not able to load, right? Okay. Now we want to, so that's just checking that the file was good, that we want to load, that's good. And now we can actually get to loading the file. So we're going to use a try except block. So we're going to try to decode the contents of the file. And if it doesn't work, then we'll catch the exception, like if there's a decode error or something. So we're going to get our text, which were the contents of it that we tried to load. And then we're going to decode those contents. Always with GTK, it's in UTF-8. So the contents one is in, I guess we need a text file and we need to decode what this returns into that text, right? So we're using UTF-8 to do that. And then unless there was some type of decode error, so we'll say Unicode error as error, then we would need to catch that exception and do something with it and print another error or something. So we could do file pretty much here. Instead of me rewriting this, how about I copy this again? If there was an issue, we'll peek at it again. And we could say the file is not encoded properly, something. Okay. And then once we're done with this, we can, if we couldn't decode our file into text, we could return from our method, right? Because we're all done. Okay, so the last part is we opened a file. Hopefully we got our text out, which is good. So we got our text, and now we need to put it on our text view. So this is kind of like the last step, and then we'll be able to open a file, that's cool. So our text view has a buffer. That's what it uses to load the text into. So we're gonna get the buffer for it. And remember, we called this the main text view. And we're going to get the buffer of it. So this GTK text view has a buffer. That's where the text gets loaded into on the view. And we're going to get that buffer. And then we're going to say, hey, buffer, I want you to set the text of it. And remember, we called it text. So we're going to pass in the text to it and say, hey, set the text of this buffer to the text we just loaded up there. And then I'm going to set the start equal to the buffer. And we want to get the beginning of the buffer. So that's called the start iter. And so that's the start position. And we're going to put the cursor at the beginning of the start of the buffer, so that, I don't know, your cursor doesn't get stuck at the bottom or something, right? You know, it's always at the beginning after you load a file. Okay. I think we did it. Should we hit go, see what happens? Okay, so we have an open button. We can click on Python, open it, and look at that. So our text editor now Now we're looking at our this same text file in our text editor itself, right? We could edit this file if we wanted to. We don't have a way to save it yet, but we could add that as a next step if we want to. But we've created this window with a text editor. We can edit text and all that type of stuff. And yeah, that's kind of the next step. So success. We got a file loaded. That's cool.
Nice job.
Yeah. So I know it's 8:15, so we're already like way over. If people are interested in staying a little bit longer, it's probably taking us another 15 minutes. We could save a file too, and then we'll have a full working text editor. Are people interested in seeing that, or should we wrap it up for today? Any feedback, team? Any excitement over saving, or should we wrap it up? No thoughts, anyone?
I'll stick around for the save if you want to toss it in there.
Okay, let's do it. So we could add the other things we could do to this is these are all like fancy ideas of things. When we open a file, it would be nice if like the title of the file was in the text editor at the top. So there's like things like that we could add. Maybe I'll skip that right now. We could also add in our keyboard shortcuts. We said Control O was open. We could add the shortcut to that as well for like completeness. But let's kind of skip through that. Let's kind of just go like, hey, we want to save a file. Because I feel like if you can't save the file, why would you have a text editor or something, right? So let's go to the next step. So kind of the pattern is we're always going to have to go to the UI file to add an option, right? On our window, and then we'll kind of hook up the plumbing on the Python side. So if we scroll down here, there's this primary menu, and this is actually the definition of the preferences, the keyboard shortcuts, and the about menu. And we want to add another one, and let's put it first, I would say. And maybe I'll just copy the one we had for label, and we can change it, right? So we had preferences as top. We probably want save as now. And then instead of app.preferences, we could do win.save as. So now if we launch this, it's nice having immediate feedback, right? So if we launch this, oh, there's a save as on our menu, right? So we've added that. It's grayed out. It doesn't do anything yet, but we got it there, right? So we have updated our UI file to add a save as. Now we need to go back to the window.py and get our save action in here. So we have these open actions, remember we added, and we need to do the same thing, but we need a save action. And save action. And instead of open, we'll call this save as. And it's the same thing for activate. We don't want an open file dialog. We want a save file dialog though, right? And we want to call the save action. Okay, so very similar to open, but we got it save now, and we've hooked up the save action. So when a save button is clicked, it will call this save file dialog. And if we run our app, we haven't done anything. Oh, so it's telling me we can't run it yet because we haven't defined a save file dialog, but let's go define that, and then we can make sure that we expect that our UI can click that save action, but it doesn't do anything, right? Save file. Save file dialog, I think, is what we have. So self, and then on our open one, we called it action and then underscore. And then we could just give it a pass right now so it doesn't do anything. But if we run it now, it's not grayed out anymore. If we click it, nothing happens, but we're making progress, right? So we have this file, save file dialog placeholder kind of there. Okay, so now we need to select a file. We need to be able to have the save file dialog do something, and we can make it very similar to this one, except now we want to save a file instead of open a file. So instead of a file, well, we can still use a file chooser native to save, except now we want to do save file as for the title. And then file chooser action instead of open is now save. So we're using the same dialog type, but we're saying, hey, this is a save type of file chooser, not an open type. And then instead of open here, we want save, and cancel is probably fine. And then it should be on save response is what we need to call. And once again, it has a native show as well. Okay. And then the last method we want to say is on save response. And let's just copy again. So we'll change the on open. I think it'll be very much the same. Okay, so it gets the same inputs. If responses accept, then we want to, instead of open the file, we want to save the file. And the rest of it can be the same. So it was actually very similar to the open code, wasn't it? Okay, so now we need a save file function. And if we go back to the top, in addition to these other imports, we're going to need to import glib, and that's another library for kind of these low-level libraries that GTK is built on top of, and we need that to be able to save a file. Okay, so we are going to define and save file. And pass in the file name. We're going to get a buffer again, the same way we did before, right? So we get the buffer from the text view. And we want the start, which is the buffer dot get start iter. So that's the start of the buffer, and then we need the end of the buffer as well. So we do buffer dot get end iter. And this is this iterator is that start and end of the buffer. So we want to find the beginning and end of the file while we're saving it, so then we are able to save the whole file. We want to retrieve all the text in it. So we do buffer dot get text, and we pass in the start and the end, and false there. And so this is all the visible text between the start and the end that it's retrieving for us. If there is no text, we could just return because the text has no text and we have nothing to save. And then this is where we're going to use glib a little bit. We want to encode our file into bytes so then we can save it. So we're going to do bytes equals glib.bytes.new. And we're going to encode our text. So call text.encode. And then we said GTK is UTF-8, right? Just when we open the file. Okay, and then we want to replace the contents of the bytes with the new ones asynchronously. So we're actually writing this to disk now, right? So we're going to call file, which is the file we had, right? And we're going to replace the contents bytes async. And we're going to pass in the bytes. None, false. So these are all the things that must pass in. And we're going to do a GIO file create flags dot none. And I don't know, this has a whole bunch of things you must pass in, but, and I guess at the end, the important part of this is we want to have it tell us when the file is complete. And if we want, we could clean this up maybe a little bit, but maybe we could reformat a little bit so it's not stuff everywhere, but I think that's good enough for now. So the final part is we need that last function to what happens when the saving file is complete, right? So let's go ahead and create a new method for that. Save file complete. And this, I think, is probably our last method here. So pass in self, the file, and the result. So we're going to get the results. So replace the contents finish. And we're going to pass in the results again, just like we did before. We're going to get the info from it. And so if we want to, we could get the display name for the file. So if something happens, we can, this is actually how you would put the file name in the title of the thing as well. So we can get the display name of the file, and if anything bad happens, we could say like, oh, this is the name of the file and we were not able to save it for whatever reason. So if so we could get the info of it, which is file.query info. So we're actually querying the file type using the operating system, or that not the file type, but the file itself, and getting its display name. And then we pass in these file query info flags again and set them to none. Okay, so we got the display name and the info, and if there is info, then we can set the display name equal to the get the attribute string of that display name. Looks kind of weird, doesn't it? The display name attribute. Okay, and then else, if we don't have any info, we could just get the base name of the file from Python. So you could call file.get base name. And then we're doing all of this because if not able to save the file, then we can print an error that says some warning, right? Unable to save. Nope. Our display name. And so if, once again, if there was a file info, it gets the name from the file. And if not, it's getting the base name from the file instead. So this is all like if it doesn't complete type of stuff. All right, so that was our file saving. We could add shortcuts and all kinds of other stuff, but let's see if it works. All right, so it's saying on line 77, we have invalid syntax somewhere because I forgot an equal sign. Let's try again. Oh, more 85. We had missed a parentheses. All right, so Michigan Python text editor. Hi, Michigan Python. And then we can go file save as. We can go to my documents or something and say text.txt or something. And we could save it. And we got an attribute error. It says no attribute file query info flags. So I think maybe there's a typo there because this should be flags, right? File info flags. Okay. Try number 2. Let's see if we can save. We'll call it text.txt again. It actually knows that the file already exists, so it's asking if we want to replace it. We can say, yep. And we should probably put something in the file again. Let's save it one more time. Okay, so if we go to like our, I think I put in documents, we should have a text file called Hi Michigan Python. Cool. So we successfully, and we could also, of course, open it with our cool text editor here as well. All right, so we can now edit and save text. We could add the save shortcuts to our keyboard shortcuts. We could also make it so when you close the window, it pops up in the same size and state it was before. We could, add some more small features to it, or even like if you have your cursor somewhere, maybe we could print that the cursor is at a certain position. That'd be kind of nice. So you could start adding some more features to text editor, but we have like a basic working text editor. And that was a little bit longer than I was planning. So thanks everyone for hanging on. Does anyone have any questions on how to make a text editor with Python?
That was great. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. That was fun.